The first few miles through Tennessee always felt postcard perfect. Rows of oaks, a blue mist resting on the ridges, cold water running over stone steps, that spring sound that tricks the mind into believing everything is pure and predictable. The night shelter, a dark wooden hut smelling of old smoke, was empty when I arrived, the floorboards creaking as though recalling names of people who passed through and never came back. The wind descended from the ridge carrying the whistle of leaves, which the locals swear is the mountain speaking softly. I spread out my sleeping bag, hung my socks on an improvised line, and sat to heat water, when the flashlight swept across a corner of the floor and found something that was not shadow. A whole skin, freshly shed, longer than my body when stretched out, its scales gleaming like glass under the light. It's strange how the brain searches for polite excuses. It could be two skins, could be meters of coincidence, could be a cruel prank left by some hiker. My hand touched the dry edge unintentionally, and the texture replied with a tiny snap. Paper that once was alive, and solitude which until then was company became a half-open door. Evening brought the cold typical of the valley, and with it a sound that was not of leaves, a slow, patient dragging from beneath the boards, as if someone were pulling a thick rope through the shelter's belly. I turned off the stove, because the hiss of gas seemed too loud in that silence, and pressed my fingers on the floor. The vibration rose up my arm like an old warning. On maps, that stretch is famed for being safe. Well-marked trail, reliable water. In conversation, the advice is never about the path, but about what dwells beside it. Limestone fissures, hollow rocks that retain heat by day and release it by night. Natural burrows that become congregations in the cold. Obedient, the flashlight plunged its beam under the shelter's planks, where the earth becomes compact shadow, and the light revealed a design of long curves carved in dust, marks like ancient calligraphy in a language without vowels. The whistle changed tone, not wind, not bird, a short, contained hiss that felt closer to my tooth than to my ear, and the skin on my arm bristled like grass at a stream's edge. Night in the Appalachians has a hurry to erase edges. Within minutes, the blue turned graphite, the graphite turned pitch black, and the shelter, which had once been a resonance box for other memories, became a fragile shell over something breathing underneath. I stepped slowly, feeling each board reply with that faint creak of tired wood, and every snap seemed a question answered below by some shift in weight. I left the stove aside. The small blade I always carry, more from habit than courage, suddenly felt heavy in my pocket, as if it might decide something. It didn't. The first touch along the deck's edge was polite. Something brushed and withdrew, like one testing an old piece of furniture to see if it's worth climbing. Then again, a bit firmer, and the leaves outside sighed. The flashlight traced, for 1 second, a thick arc. The shadow of a body that chose the edge before the center. The eye, always hunting for a head to name danger, found none. It found intention instead. The shelter, with its low wall and its opening to the forest, is built so beauty may enter without knocking. In that moment I understood it also lets the rest in however it sees fit. The sound of the creek receded, as though someone had closed a door on the water. I heard only my own shallow breathing and a new cadence, 1-2, a glide that was not step, not paw, but muscle measuring board. It was the mountain rising into a wooden rectangle. I swallowed hard and did what any hiker does when night presents an old problem. I returned to basics. I placed the pack nearby with the headlamp accessible, the trekking pole within reach, and the tiny radio I rarely rely on. I thought of shouting, but the forest here swallows voice, and calling for help is an invitation for panic to take up residence on the tongue. When the head appeared, it was not like the stories of a boat in the water. It emerged flat, slowly, eyes of opaque beads reflecting only a sliver of moonlight, and the tongue drew a line in the air that seemed to slice the cold. There was beauty there, I admit, a beauty that offends because it needs no witness. The shelter breathed with me. The board gave a slender reply, and the body behind the head promised meters I had no way to measure without lying beside the dry skin. For a foolish moment I wished another hiker would appear with a loud laugh and a silly story to break the enchantment. The next second I was grateful no one else was present to let the snake measure more than the board and me. I closed the sleeping bag zipper up to my chest, not for warmth but for containment, like one trying to shrink one's presence to the size of a thought. The pole, leaning against the wall, seemed useless against that which does not back away with a push, and the rules one learns, don't provoke, don't feed it, don't try to handle it, sounded like a profane catechism to recite without faith, but with discipline. Outside, the trees blurred into lines in the dark, and within the shelter something changed its mind. The head withdrew a span, the body shifted weight, and the hiss, brief, sounded once, with no hurry. At that time, a cold wind entered through the front opening, an air corridor that stirred fine dust and shook my socks on the line like pennants at a sad festival. The flashlight nearly fell from my hand, and when I grabbed it back, the beam landed on the wall, 4 parallel marks in the dust, each twice the width of my finger. Whatever it was, it had no hurry to leave, but it also had no hunger for me. It had the habit of the shelter, the path of heat, the knowledge of the underground. And the trail, out there, persisted, indifferent, as though beauty and terror were merely 2 sides of the same stone blade. The stove, forgotten, gave off a faint smell of gas, a micro-leak or my imagination trying to invent another fear, and I opened the valve to dissipate it. The metallic click of the knob echoed, and by reflex, the body beneath the boards shifted weight again, a meter back, 2 to the side. The tongue, invisible, seemed to trace the edge of the world once more. I lay down without closing my eyes, and the shelter over something that chose not to show everything shrank until it felt like a shell. The night stretched like leather over stone, and the trail, inevitable, awaited the morning's decision. I lay down without closing my eyes and counted my breaths as if they were stone steps up a summit, because my mind had started inventing noises where there was only silence, and that silence, on those floorboards, had the texture of leather. Below, the dragging sound returned, slow, and a dry crack answered when the weight shifted, as if something were testing the beams with the patience of an old carpenter. With each creak, my body begged to shrink another inch into the sleeping bag, as if becoming smaller could turn me into part of the shelter, and not the novelty of the night. To the east, the wind shifted, bringing the smell of wet leaves without rain, just forest sweat, and the short hiss slotted into my ear like a memory that wasn't mine. The shelter was made for airflow, but the cold that came now carried something warm, a heat that wasn't from the stove nor from my body, but from living mass stored in the stone's hollow during the day, released through the ground at night. People who know this stretch swear the real danger isn't being followed. It's surprising something that was already there. That phrase hit different when the flashlight, sweeping a corner, found another old skin, brittle, smaller, curled near the wall like a forgotten glove. On the trail during the day, the warnings are clear. Watch your step, use your trekking pole to check leaves and crevices before reaching in, give space when the rattle warns you. With copperheads, double your attention. Their camouflage is dead leaf, and they bite without warning if they feel invaded. But here there was no rattlesnake, no rattle at all, just the certainty of something big that preferred warmth over a fight. And the floorboards, complicit, told me the story in short vibrations, 1-2-1-2, like a metronome rehearsing either courage or foolishness. A different kind of touch raised the hairs on my neck. Not a drag, but a long brushing along the outer edge of the deck, like a heavy rope gliding across smooth stone. The flashlight, precise and cowardly, lit up the black void beyond the boards and found only dust dancing in the beam. I turned it off for a second to listen better, and in the dark the forest multiplied my fears, echoing back the crack of twigs, small footfalls, and that thread of a hiss that could have been a leaf or could have been a warning. Because in the Appalachians, they say, the only venoms that matter are 2, timber rattlers and copperheads, and neither one wastes energy on big animals unless you step on them first. I turned the light back on, dropped the beam so as not to insult the darkness, and did the only thing that felt reasonable. I dragged my backpack slowly until it became a wall between me and the edge of the deck. Not a shield, a reminder for my feet, in case panic decided to take over mid-sleep. The radio scratched static and, as always, found no one. The knife remained honestly useless. In my head, I repeated the advice that has already saved people. Don't touch, don't try to drive it off, give space, give time. Wait for morning like waiting for help, which is just light entering from above. The forest sometimes gifts false sounds, branches snapping like bones, leaves whispering like skin. And I almost fell for it, until the shelter gave a slight groan in one corner. Then came a pause, one of those that hurts the eardrum, and after that, the vibration changed frequency. Deeper, fuller. A shadow cut across the flashlight beam for a second along the deck's edge. I didn't see a head. I didn't see a tail. I saw a path, a thick curve forming an incomplete sea disappearing underneath, like it passed through a tunnel below my feet. I thought about what people would say later, that I should have taken the shelter down and camped in a tent, zipper closed, ground pad far from the stone hollows. That shelters are invitations for mice, and sometimes for what eats mice. Maybe they'd be right, but a tent in that darkness would have just been a plastic envelope between one old body and mine. The shelter at least gave me the lie of distance, wood pretending to be stone, the rear wall smelling of old smoke pretending to be protection. When the tongue sounded for the first time, because that's what it was, I don't know how else to explain it, a soft click that wasn't insect, wasn't wind, just the world touching air in 2 beats. My entire body responded. And I understood why some hikers swear they've heard things that don't fit on the map. It wasn't supernatural, it was just nature with no desire to be translated. The click came again, twice more, then nothing. Silence weighed like a damp blanket, and the urge to cough just to prove I still existed almost won. In the end, there was no attack, no show, no documentary ending. There was a vigil, me watching a breathing emptiness, and the emptiness watching a trembling presence. The night passed, inch by inch, until a thread of birdsong, far off, announced the day's first edge. Then, as if someone had blown beneath the floorboards, the warmth was gone. The floor stopped vibrating. The shelter returned to being just wood and dust. The dry skin in the corner looked smaller in the grey light, and I allowed my hands one foolish gesture. I touched the sleeping bag and thanked it for shrinking me without erasing me. Outside, the trail was waiting, clean, wet with dew, marked by fresh tracks no one but me would understand. Faint grooves in the mud, the curved imprint of a body. I walked on with short steps, pole-tapping the ground ahead, eyes on the path and not on the stories the mountain keeps. And I repeated in a low voice the practical version of fear. Watch your step, give space to what warns, don't reach into shadows, and if the night calls, pitch your tent far from hollow rock. I wanted to believe in all of that. But the blue mist, so beautiful, looked like it was hiding ancient smiles among the trees. The sun rose shyly, and the blue mist hung in the valleys like a damp cloth, leaving the trail cold and too beautiful for the night story to fully fit into it. So I walked in silence, trekking pole-probing leaves and crevices, repeating the Appalachian Catechism. Watch your step, give space to what warns, never stick your hand in a hole, because copperheads and timber rattlers prefer to avoid you, but they'll bite without ceremony if you cross their line. A few kilometers ahead, the path dipped into a stone slab crossed by a thin sheet of water, and the rock still held yesterday's warmth beneath today's chill. The kind of place where cold-blooded creatures stretch out like shadows to drink sun, and where a distracted hiker quickly learns that a copperhead's camouflage is just autumn itself scattered on the ground, dead leaves with eyes. I took the detour that skirts the slope above a limestone outcrop, and to the left, a corridor of deep cracks exhaled warmer air, the signature of stone hollows that turned the underground into an old hotel. The wind coming from there carried a dry murmur, more a feeling than a sound, as if the valley were whispering about what it saw at dawn. My thoughts returned to the shelter and the way the floorboards reacted to the presence beneath, as if they remembered the names of past winters. Dry skins layered in dust, whispers of those who slept too lightly. And even as I moved, my body still held the 1-2 metronome of that dragging, a rhythm that isn't quite music nor threat, just the clock of something that measures the world through contact and silence. A small group came the other way, 2 section hikers and a skinny through hiker, with the look of someone who talks to trees. My question came out before even a hello. Seen any big sheds or markings in the southern shelters? The older one pointed north with his pole and said the next shelter had surprises in the floorboards and that they preferred tents away from hollow rock when the nights turned cold. Advice that sounded less like paranoia and more like local etiquette. In my mental map, I marked the risk zones: low decks over hollow ground, stone walls that hold heat, slabs with cracks where water cuts through, and in between, peaceful stretches of wet leaves and clean trail, reminding me that danger here has geography, not whim. And that beauty, even when pure, is often the curtain for things that prefer the shadows. At noon, I stopped in a small clearing, ringed with fallen logs, and took off my boots to feel the blood return to my heels. That's when I noticed, in the mud nearby, the same handwriting I had met before dawn. A wide, smooth arc, not hoof or paw, but the shape of a body pushing through shallow water, then slipping back into the brush. A signature that daylight couldn't make any less real. Hunger called for the stove, but my ears won out. Lunch became a slowly chewed granola bar, eyes on the edge of the clearing, trekking pole laid close like an extension of my arm. Not a weapon, just a reminder for my feet that attention is part of the pack, just like the filter, map, and headlamp, and that no courage makes up for lack of method in the Appalachians. By late afternoon, when the sun tilted and the oaks began to stretch long shadows, I reached another shelter, higher up, better ventilated. I circled it before stepping in, tapping the boards with the pole and checking the space beneath. A simple ritual that separates those who arrive whole from those who become a warning on the corkboard. And there, whether by luck or respect, nothing moved but dust. Even so, the old skin from the previous shelter stayed with me like a bookmark. As I rolled out my sleeping bag, I left room for the improbable, backpack on one side, pole on the other, and a clear exit aligned with the trail. Because if the night decided to remind me that the shelter belongs to everyone, I'd rather have a way out that didn't need thinking. Just feet. Night fell again, eager to erase outlines, and the new shelter, higher up, drier, felt almost too safe for what memory insisted on repeating. So I took inventory of the basics before darkness could take over my thinking. Headlamp fully charged, pole within reach, backpack as a soft barrier, stove shut tight, and a full circuit around the shelter, tapping the floorboards with my pole like listening to the ribcage of something alive. The wind brought that scent of cold leaves and damp stone, the kind that announces dawn, and in the pause between one twig snap and another, I recalled the boring but necessary lesson the trail teaches better than any brochure. Whoever sleeps over hollow rock also sleeps over someone else's memory. And here, respect isn't poetry, it's procedure. Watch your step. Give space to what warns. Avoid crevices and sun-warmed slabs, and if possible, pitch a tent when the floorboards feel like they're holding heat that isn't from the day. There was just enough quiet to almost believe in forgetting, until from the direction of the outcrop, a faint sound scratched through the silence. Not a rattle, not a step, but the slide of something heavy across wet leaves. The kind of sound locals describe as a thick rope across smooth stone, easy to call imagination by daylight, but at night it presses on your bones from the inside. The flashlight swept slow and low respectfully, finding only dust in the beam and a corridor of crevices breathing warm air, the same signature of underground hotels that park signs warn about without drama. Timber rattlers and copperheads prefer to avoid conflict, but they punish distraction. I repeated the trail's catechism aloud, like a hand keeping itself from pretending to be brave. Don't poke, don't drive it off, don't shine light into its eyes out of stubbornness. Don't test courage where the mountain stores have it. The shelter groaned in two boards as if saying present, and I stopped narrating in my head. Too many words distract, and attention here is the cheapest insurance there is. The vibration I feared never came, and the 1-2 metronome from the night before didn't set in, as if the hollow had guests in another wing. But the lesson doesn't depend on presence, it depends on memory. Organized in the next limestone slope where the trail runs over lungs of stone. When sleep came, it came softly. The alarm that woke me hours later was the first bird down in the valley, that batteryless clock. I got out of the sleeping bag, with the care reserved for thin ice, packed everything in silence, and only then stepped to the edge of the deck to check the ground, where faint arcs cut through the mud like handwriting, vanishing into the brush. Enough confirmation that last night's caution wasn't paranoia. Along the way, a notice pinned to the shelter's corkboard seemed written just for me. Snakes are part of this ecosystem. Give them space, watch where you step, avoid reaching into crevices. And that printed banality gained the urgency of someone who spent the night counting vibrations, because some texts only become true when the wood responds the right way to the wrong weight. I descended to the stone slab, pole touching before each step, and on a rock warmed by timid sunlight, a copperhead lay curled like a dry leaf with eyes, perfect in its camouflage, indifferent to my quiet awe. A calm reminder that last night's terror also has the small face of routine, and that the trail, generous as ever, returns a safe passage to those who return a full distance. I continued with steps that neither apologized nor provoked, and when the blue mist began to rise from Tennessee's folds, the beauty returned with postcard strength. But behind it stayed a new kind of accounting, the respect of listening to the ground like a drum, of seeing hollow stone as a lung, of only sleeping where the floor doesn't breathe, and never mistaking silence for absence. At the next signpost, a white AT blaze painted on old wood pointed north with the calm of symbols that have seen everything. And the trail, as always, promised me nothing. No terror, no miracle. Just kept going, asking of my body what the mountain asks of everyone: method, humility, and the good sense to stay out of the way of what was here long before.